Okay, so I will simply start by drawing using ink pen on top of my pencil sketch. So this is going to be um, relatively quick. I filmed in a speed up version a little bit because, you know, it's not very interesting to watch. So the idea is not to show too much details here, but instead just use this time to analyze what you are going to paint and how you're going to paint it. So for instance, while I was doing this sketch, I decided that the only white area that I will leave on my watercolor is going to be the laundry, and all the rest of it is going to be in shades of gray and yellow. And you will see that I will end this first part of the drawing by adding a first layer of watercolor, a first wash, which is quite light, and it's going to simply divide the painting into two areas, a light one and a dark one. So the light part is going to be in yellow and the dark part is going to be in gray, and then I will add more detail. So I'm almost done with my ink pen drawing. So I like to use this technique very much because it's very handy, especially if you're going to draw in a sketchbook. It's quick and it's easy. So as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit of gray on top of my window, on top of my drawing. And I'm simply going to try to leave the area with the laundry white. And also on the left of the window, there's like a small area that is lit by the sun. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to give a little bit of a darker gray, blue gray, behind the laundry so that it pops up. Okay, so I'm not adding any detail at the moment, it's just a really quick sketch. I'll just leave it a little bit of yellow there, and then I'll let it dry. It's very important to let it dry completely on this stage, because if you don't, then the watercolor might end up being a little bit muddy. So now I'm going to use the small brush, the tiny one that comes with the watercolor set, and I'm simply going to add a little bit more of detail using a blue-gray and a lighter blue for the windows. Okay. So this is really the part that it takes a little bit longer to complete, and you need to be quite patient. So I'm going to first draw more details on the windows, and in particular, I don't know if you can see it on the photograph, but there is a curtain on the inside of the window. So I'm going to paint those vertical lines using different shades of blue, and by the end of the painting I'm going to give it a little bit of texture even, so that we can see the details of this curtain on the inside. And so this is going to take quite some time because I will need to paint it on with different shades of gray and blue. Okay. Also, around the area with the laundry, I'm going to give it a little bit of more of darker gray so that it pops up. And also you can see in the photograph that it's darker on this area. And I will try to give depth to my window by shading some areas under the window frame in particular. So now I'm painting while my first blue lines, horizontal lines, were still yet wet, so that the darker blue is going to mix a little bit with the lighter blue, and so it's going to give this undulated effect on the curtains. I'm going to use a much darker gray to paint the area behind the laundry, behind the linen that is drying on the sun, and this is going to allow it to pop. And because it's like the funny element of this drawing, of this sketch. So I want it to become a thing that we see right away when we look at the sketch. So you can see that the yellow I've put in the beginning on the left of the window, it's not very saturated now, because that's what happens most of the time with watercolor. It looks quite saturated while it's wet, and then when it dries away, it fades away as well. So you need to think about that when you add colors. What I'm going to do about it is that I'm going to add a little bit more of saturated yellow by the end. But for now, I just want to work these gray areas so that I will have different shades of gray, so that it gives depth to this window frame. And to do this, I like to work with this small brush, because it is much easier to draw it out small things. And also the paint draws much faster. So if you do sketches outside and you do not have a hairbrush, well, using a small brush like that is helpful as well, because you're going to use much less water, and the watercolor is going to dry much faster. It's a bit tedious to do all these horizontal lines, but then again, that's what gives detail to the watercolor. I think they are quite important, but they need to be in a relatively lighter shade of gray, because if not, they are going to contrast the linen on the front, so it would be a shame. So as you can see, for now I'm still only painting with one gray, just one simple gray, and I have really not added much color on this watercolor. I'm going to add just a little bit of color at the end, and it's going to be for the flower pots, and also on the left there's one piece of linen that is colored, so I'm going to give a little bit of color for that one, but that's all. Okay, so some areas, some dark areas can be really dark and gray, almost black, and then for others I can use blue, as I'm doing now, so that it does give a little bit of color on the watercolor. Otherwise it can look a little bit dull. Actually, I do not always use the real color when I paint these cityscape sketches. Sometimes I might use colors that are not really realistic. As you can see on the right of my sketchbook, you can see a landscape of the rooftops of Marseille, and you can see that there's a lot of color, like lots of yellows and blues and reds, and these are definitely not the real colors of the city, which is more like into the grays. But just, I think it's very nice to try to add a little bit of color to represent the light, and give it a little bit more of a vivid and interesting look. So really, I think that I'm almost done with my grays, because it's not too bad. I'm just going to add a little bit more detail around the edges of the windows. If you look at the picture, you will see that the window frame is actually lighter, and then the glazing is darker. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And also I'm trying not to forget the curtains. I think it's really important to be able to see that there are curtains behind the glazing. Okay, and so I will try to paint a little detail beneath the window, and And then it's going to be time to add a little bit of color to this sketch. So as you can see, it's a real quick sketch. It's going to take like 14 minutes to complete. So that's quite quick. You don't need to take hours to do like a watercolor sketch, so that's what I like about it actually. So now I'm going to try to paint these flower pots using a technique of wet on wet. So I'm going to first use like a yellow and then add some reds into it and let them mix together. This will give volume, and also it will give like a different way of painting it compared to the technique I've used for the window. It's a lot looser. So there's one that's brown, and then the other one is going to be green, and I'm going to use the exact same technique. So I'm using first a light green, and then I will add a little bit more blue and green, more saturated and darker, to give a little bit of a shade effect. And so the last thing I'm going to do is also paint the linen on the left that is colored. It's important to not use a similar color to the glazing, because it's going to just fade away. So that's why, even though it's blue, I painted it in green because I just didn't want it to fade away. And so now I will add a little bit of texture for the curtains. That's the last part of the watercolor, but please don't leave yet, because at the end of the video I will show you another window watercolor painting. So it's a very different one, and you might enjoy it as well. You never know. So there we go, we're almost there. As you can see, it's a real quick and easy sketch. Painting a window in watercolor just takes a few minutes, and it's a nice way to make like an illustrated journal, or maybe why not a travel journal. So it's easier to paint details like that, just a window maybe, or just a door, or maybe just a bike. But if you try to paint like a whole cityscape, well, sometimes it can be a little bit trickier. So that's why for my sketchbooks I like to just paint details like that, and then just have a loose sketch of a whole cityscape thing. So it adds a nice mix up. So maybe in the next video I will show you this whole sketchbook. Thanks for watching anyway, and I hope you did like this quick watercolor sketch.